Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to be joined by Matt Bove, the sports director at Channel 7 WKBW. Since July of 2019, he started with the network in 2013, and very prominent, familiar face and voice with Western New York sports. And we look forward to getting into all this with him and some other fun stuff. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, we wanted to dive in with you, and I love the podcast that you do with Sal, all of them, but then especially the one about the schedule release coming up. But before we do that, maybe we could talk about, your journey and your career to where you are now as, a local kid going to Buff State and then, covering the team. I'm assuming it was kind of a dream and kind of a goal. So maybe you could just kind of talk people through how you got there, and maybe for anybody listening that, maybe would want to be a Matt Bove someday, any tips or insights as to how they could get there too.
I don't know if anybody wants to be a Matt Bove. I can tell you that for sure. But basically, my journey, like you mentioned, I grew up, born and raised in Western New York. I actually grew up in Wheatfield, so actually not that far from Star Point, what we were talking about earlier. I went to school at Buff State for journalism. I was there for 3.5 years. While I was there, I interned at Channel 7. That kind of got my foot in the door. I knew I wanted to do something in media, but I didn't exactly know what it was. So I interned there. I felt like I picked it up pretty quickly. I think I made a good impression. They actually called me back a couple weeks after the internship was done to have like a temporary part-time job doing a bunch of behind-the-scenes stuff. So, I would have been dumb not to take it. So I tried to do that while also working at the Fashion Outlet Mall and getting my final semester done at school.
What store did you work at the mall?
I worked at Gap for 3 years, and I worked at Nike for 1 year. So those are like my college jobs. And then, so my last semester of school, I was working at the mall, I was going to school, and then I was working nights at Channel 7. I did that for about 6 or 7 months, and then eventually they made me a full-time employee. Did a little bit of everything there, but I actually started as a news reporter. So I did that for several years and then eventually transitioned into sports. And I think it was either 2015 or 2016, somewhere in that wheelhouse. Now, I knew sports. I love sports. So I was familiar with kind of, how to cover a team, just because, when you love something, it's a pretty easy thing to pick up. So I started helping with the sports department even before I was in the sports department. And then I think that was kind of my natural way really to, take the next steps. I really am grateful for the guy who had my job before me. His name's Joe Biscaglia. He covers the team. He works for The Athletic. He really was my mentor from the start. He gave me so many opportunities and was so great to me. And we have become lifelong friends ever since then. So for me, I think it was a little bit of right place, right time. I think it was a little bit of hard work. And I also think it was just, when you really, really want something, you just have to kind of go all in. And I was not somebody who really went all in on anything. I didn't go all in on my jobs. I didn't go all in on my school. But then once you finally have something, then you're like, okay, this is it. So then I knew that I had to take it serious, and here we are today.
Well done. Buff State is on fire here with us, Josh. Last we had Howard Simon on recently, and Mark Gaughan.
Right.
And they both really, they both were very clear about how they believed that Buff State prepared them extremely well.
Yeah, we were doing a little bit of research on you, and you had an interview with Bengal Tales, and you talked about your favorite class being Europe since 1500, which I thought was interesting for somebody who covers the Bills. That was kind of interesting.
The whole reason behind that, honestly, so the professor who taught the class was unbelievable, and like I kind of just mentioned, I was not an exceptional student. I was a pretty good student. I was a good enough student that I didn't have to put a ton of effort into anything, and I was able to always get decent grades, but I didn't really go above and beyond. And for some reason, that class just like lit a light bulb in my head because he told it as a story. He did not tell it as if it was like, okay, we're reading this out of a textbook. This is what we want to know. You walked into the first class and he started telling a story. And basically every day was another story. And he explained why things happened, why it was important, and then what was going to happen next. And at the end of the day, what my job is you're a storyteller. Like, that is what you do for a living. You're telling a story. Now, it's a pretty easy story to tell. It's usually about football or hockey or some sort of sports. It's not that complicated. But I think that's why it resonated with me so much, because he just told it as a story. And I always found that fascinating. And I retained the information so much better than I have in any other class that I took in college. And that was stuff that was even inside my field in communications. So shout out to that guy, because it was a great class.
And I was gonna ask you. I'm glad you said it that way. I was gonna ask you, did you take lessons from? I read that you said you enjoyed it in a story form. What have you taken from that as to how like you present news or information about the Sabres or the Bills? And do you find that you're able to kind of differentiate yourself in any way with compared to basically all the other guys who are reporting on the same thing? Like, how can you be maybe just a little bit different or a little bit easier to digest the information for people?
It's hard to do it day to day, but I feel like I've kind of got two little buckets that you can put what I do in. And one of it is like the day-to-day coverage of going out to a Bills practice and seeing what's going on and reporting the big news of the day, who's there, who wasn't there, why it's important. And then the other stuff is the storytelling and trying to find things that people might not know about or that might interest people. So I think it's really difficult to kind of differentiate the two on a day-to-day basis. It's not like every single day I'm going and telling this great story. A lot of the times I'm just kind of telling you what happened, and I'm trying to do it in a really easy way to understand and a conversational way to understand. And then the other times that's when you can really like get into it. And those are the things that you're passionate about. It's finding those stories, setting those up, meeting those people, building those connections. But it's local news. There's only so many resources. There's only so many hours in a day. You have to find the balance between the one and the other, because you need to do the day-to-day stuff, but you also need to do the other stuff to kind of just keep your creative juices flowing. So I try and do the storytelling and finding those as many times a year as I can, but it doesn't happen all the time, just because we also got to, talk about the Bills, talk about the Sabres, talk about that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. I would think the podcast lends itself well to your storytelling nature. A couple things. I when I was with the Bills front office up until 2017, Joe Buscaglia worked. He traveled with the team, and I remember watching him. He was a hard worker. I mean, he got after it, and so I can see why you looked up to him in terms of how someone really applies themselves and invests themselves. So. When I always find this interesting in your business, how do you handle the challenge of hearing something, but it's off the record? You're at a restaurant, you're at a bar, you're at your kid's soccer game, and say, "Hey, I heard this, or this player's a neighbor," and like, how do you navigate that?
So journalistically, the way I was always taught it is you need something from two legitimate sources to ever go on the record and to report it. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, because like you mentioned, so many times you hear it from one person, or you hear a rumbling of something and you look into it, and then you can get it from one person, but you can't get it from another person. So I always tell people there's a lot of things that happen that I think we know about, but don't really get reported, just because you don't want to put your neck out there for something that could potentially be wrong. And I always say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And that's the conversation that I have about a lot of these big news stories that happen. And, I'm not in the business of trying to compete with Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport. Like, right. I know if I'm trying, I'm going to lose. So I really don't even try that hard. But there are things that are still important that you need to look into. And it's tough. It's tough knowing things and not being able to report it. One, from just like a professional standpoint, like you want to give that information to the people because that's why they're following you. That's why they're watching you. And it's also a little tough from an ego standpoint, because it feels like you want the recognition of knowing like, okay, I knew this was going to happen, but I didn't want to burn the bridge with the person who told me that it was going to happen, because there's that trust level there. So, there's some stuff that it helps with on the back end, like when there's Bills news stories happening or Sabres news stories happening and we have a head start on it, we can kind of get it all done. So then when it happens, we're just like ready to go. Okay, boom, we're ready. But, it's this big, delicate dance, and there's no right answer to it. I just have always thought it's better to be safe than sorry in those instances, because I would rather be right than be first. And that's one of the other things that I always kind of just have in the back of my head. I don't think people remember if you were the first person to report that Latavius Murray was signing a 1-year deal with the team. Like, I don't think anybody is going to be like, oh, Matt Bove had that 2 minutes before the people at the other station. I don't think that gets you anywhere. The times when it's tricky are, stadium stuff that is very relevant, pertinent information that a lot of people want to know about. I guess stuff that like really, really big news, but it's just, it's just so complicated. It's a great question because I do feel like a lot of things that are going on and you hear from a lot of different people. And some people treat media like they want to tell it. You know what I mean? Some people kind of like putting a little thing out there. And somebody always told me once, and this was pretty important. They were like, you really have to stick to that two source thing because somebody might tell you something to see if you throw it out there, and then they'll know that they can't trust you. Like they might feed you wrong information to see if you run with it, because then they're going to know if they can trust you or not.
Have you ever had somebody come to you wanting to be a source? Like, how do you guys deal with that? Like, what's the protocol if either somebody comes to you and says, hey, guess what I heard? And obviously kind of the elephant in the room right now is everybody knows all the rumors going around about, certain people and their relationship status, et cetera. And, we don't want to talk about that specifically, but what do you do if somebody comes to you with some information and they're in a credible place or, they're a team employee or whatever? Mm-hmm. How do you parse whether even one person is credible or not?
Well, I think it depends on the person. It depends on the relationship you have with the person. Like I had mentioned, I know that I would always need two things, but if I'm getting it from one person and that one person is in the front office, usually I'll feel pretty comfortable kind of going forward with it, especially if they're on the football side of things. And then just from like the stuff that's really, really outlandish or the stuff that seems like it's a little bit too crazy, then that's when you start to have conversations with other people. But you even then have to be a little bit delicate there, because when then you give that validity, then for some reason it kind of continues to take off. So given the example that you just said, if somebody has that conversation with me and then I ask other people about it, then I think it almost adds fuel to the fire and makes it even crazier. So you have to try and kind of navigate what's worth having those conversations about and what's worth just, coming home and telling your wife, hey, I heard this. No idea if it's true, but that's kind of what's out there right now.
That's interesting. You're almost like a gatekeeper of information in a way, right? Because if you then ask one person, it might multiply the amount of people who find out about it by like 5, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you saying it gives it some sort of credibility, whether it's true or not. The fact that you heard it as opposed to just some random person on the street, it feels like you maybe, your conversations carry a little bit more weight with people than just, a random Joe on the street.
Yeah, I just always think too, I think you're right about that. But it's just, I always think these people are humans. Like in a lot of settings, like especially if it's news that is not favorable to an individual, to a team, to, whatever the situation is, these people are humans. So you better be right and it better be relevant. And this is like a fascinating journalism conversation that you can have about so many different layers. Like a really great example of this, quite frankly, is the health situation with Kim Pegula. That's a great example because she is a human. Like that is somebody's mother. That is somebody's wife. She's also a very prominent person within Western New York. And she's getting lots and lots of money from a lot of different people to build the stadium. So you navigate, what is she here? Is she a human? And is her health information, something that should be reported on? Or is she a human? Her health information should be protected. That's not something that it's our business to be talking about. Or she's the owner of the Buffalo Bills who are building a new stadium and getting a ton of money, and her health is relevant information to taxpayers who are contributing to that stadium. And you have to go back and forth. And those are the times when you just need to lean on the people that you trust. And you have to have the conversations of saying, what do we think makes sense here to do? And it's tough. And I mean, that's an extreme example of it, but you have those levels and then you have things that are more day-to-day news, and that's when it gets a little bit easier to navigate.
Yeah, we talked to Mark Gahn rather about after Damar Hamlin, and the only person you were hearing from was Damar Hamlin's uncle, who was there, and You wanted to believe him. You wanted to believe that, but was it enough? Was he in the room? It wasn't an official statement from the hospital or the Bills or something. Going back to something you said about, the information gatekeeper is a good way to put it, Josh. When I was with the Bills, it worked both ways. If we brought someone new into kind of the inner circle of football personnel decision making, I recall a couple times where trial balloons were floated with a person to say, maybe we're interested in this player or that player, not a blockbuster thing, something mid to low level that if it happened, it happened. If it didn't, it wasn't, people weren't going to lose their minds. But, and just interesting enough. And if there are only 5 people in the room and all of a sudden Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter is reporting that the Bills might have, like, whoa, okay. It wasn't any of the 4 of us. Suddenly that person would kind of be pushed out of the circle of trust, or worse. It's not a good look. Yeah.
No, and that's the thing. Like, that's why you kind of always have to make sure that you really do your due diligence on things, because you will hear some crazy things. The things that I have heard that I don't even kind of think are true happens probably more often than when I hear something that's very legitimate, and then I need to start looking into it. But you would be amazed at how many times, DeAndre Hopkins has been in Buffalo to Orchard Park. People want to talk to you about it. Or, back in the day, how many times, this was way before me, but like somebody saw Michael Vick at Duff's something. All of these just absolutely ridiculous, outlandish things. And they spread like wildfire, right? Because people like to have these conversations. People like to talk about things that are fun, exciting, interesting. And it's just like a game of telephone. There's one thing, and then it goes to the next person, and the story changes a little bit. And then it goes to the next person, then all of a sudden you've got this crazy outlandish thing, and you're like, okay, this is just bananas. But that goes back to, though, when you have the conversations with the people who are actually in the know, then you start to look into it a little bit more. And then if you can find out something, you find out something. But if you can't, for me, no sweat. That is so far down the list of things that I think are important with my job that I'm not really worried about it.
Yeah, and in the case I laid out before, we never blamed the reporter. I mean, if they heard it from someone inside the organization that was in the football department, why wouldn't they think there was credibility to it? I remember it was one time, though, I did it, kind of an internal joke to Chris Brown. Jason Peters was unsigned. He was between contracts. We were trying to re-sign him. And my office looked out on the One Bills Drive in the parking lot down there. And he was on just getting ready to do like a parking lot shot with John Murphy. And I texted Chris before I could see they were on the air and said, hey, Jason Peters just drove past you. And he turned around and looked, and I'm like, sorry. He goes, you got me.
It's funny.
So, I didn't do it while he was on the air. But,
yeah. Good stuff. Yeah. So Matt, maybe we could just change directions here a little bit. I think people are always interested in, kind of the day-to-day operations at the stadium. Don and I have talked quite a bit about what it's like inside the building. Can you maybe walk people through what it's like for you on a Wednesday of a game week? Like, what does it mean to like cover the team? Where are you most of the day? Maybe, just take a minute and walk through your timeline on a practice Wednesday.
You guys are good. You guys are good that you went to Wednesday, because of course that is the busiest day. So
we both worked there for many years. Yeah, so
I appreciate you knowing that. So basically a typical Wednesday for me, my job has evolved a little bit over the years that I have a little bit more flexibility, and I really appreciate that, because Wednesdays are just a grind. So for me, the busiest days of the week are Monday, because we have a show, and there's also usually travel involved. So if we're on the road, you're traveling somewhere, then you've got to do a show. It's just a really long day. Sundays, obviously, and then Wednesdays, just because there's so many things that are happening. So for me, usually what I do is I just drive to the stadium. I'll meet somebody at the stadium, whether it's one of my colleagues, whether it's a photographer, and the day will start like it probably has for years and years and years, with a press conference from Sean McDermott. Now, Sean, nice guy, doesn't really ever say anything in his press conferences that's earth-shattering, unless it's an update on something, unless he's updating us. Von Miller actually tore his ACL. He is not going to play football again this year, or this guy will not play on Sunday. Like, unless it's like a very like finite health update, usually there's few times when he'll say something that is earth-shattering. And that just means that he's good at his job and that he's trained well, because, Rex all he did was say things that made our lives a lot easier. So, you'll do that. And then you'll go out to practice. And for me, my process is just take the little roster sheet that you have and just double check that all of the big names are there. I'm not going through every single player on the 53-man roster. There are some people who do that. I work at a local TV station. I'm not doing that. I'm looking for Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, boom, 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 boom. Okay, everybody's here. We're good to go. Then you just need to figure out what is the big story for the day. Sometimes there's easy ones. Sometimes it's low-hanging fruit. Micah Hyde is practicing again. There's a chance that he could play on Sunday for the first time. Other times, you got to be a little bit more creative. It's easy when they're really good or they're really bad. It's hard when they're mediocre, because when they're mediocre every day, as I'm sure you guys both know, even from the reporting standpoint, every day, every week feels like it's the same thing over and over again. It's like, they're not going to make the playoffs, but these games still matter because there's an outside chance they do, and we got to figure out what the future of the team is. Now it's very, very, black and white. Like, this team's good enough to go get a 1 seed, and this is how they've got to do it, or, this team is not reaching the expectations that they're set. So going back to the storytelling thing we talked about earlier, we'll usually try and do 2 main things when we go to a Wednesday practice. 1, find a story, and 2, find just whatever the news of the day is. And then we can have one of us do the news of the day, and we can have one of us do the story. So the example of the story would be like, okay, the last time they played, Nyheim Hines had 2 kickoff returns against the Patriots, which really lifted them in that game. Let's talk to him specifically about, his role on the team, what that moment was like, how he can continue to grow with this offense, blah, blah, blah. And then the other thing could be like, okay, the Dolphins are coming to town for wild card weekends. They've got a backup quarterback. We've got to hear from the team, the defense, about what it's going to be like playing against somebody they don't have film on. And we got to hear from Josh about, how they can continue to have success against the offense. So all of that stuff happens. Then that's usually what we do while the team is practicing. We try and figure out kind of what we want to do for the day. And then once practice is done, we'll go into the locker room. We'll talk to whoever. We'll do the press conferences with the big name players that don't talk at their locker. So Josh, Diggs, Poyer, Vaughn, etc. And then after that, it's just, chaos. You'll usually finish that around 3:00. And then you're trying to get everything ready to be on the news at 5:00, at 6:00, at 6:30, at 7:00, just because it is such a big thing. We say all the time, I make the joke with people in our building. I know it's football. I know it is not life-altering stuff that we're covering, but more people in Buffalo care about this than 90% of the other stories that we're telling. And, you always say a newscast is built like an inverted pyramid, right? The most important things are at the top, and then you kind of slowly wean your way down. You make sure you get weather in there, you get sports in there. So that's a little bit of where it kind of starts to change. But I'm like, you could start with the Bills every single day, and I really don't think people would complain. I just really don't.
I would agree with you. Let me ask you, Matt, in the Wednesday calls with the opposition coaches, have you ever been able to solicit an answer from Bill Belichick that was remotely memorable or newsworthy?
You know what? I think the first time I even was comfortable asking a question to Bill Belichick would have been in 2019. And it was the year that the Bills had made the playoffs already, but we didn't know where they were going to be. It was like a Saturday afternoon game in Foxborough. And I asked him something about how his life, or I guess how it's different coaching Josh Allen at that point as it was in years past. So in the first game of the year and the other, and he actually gave me like a fairly good answer. From what I've been told, he's better in that setting than he is with the people who he sees every single day, because he's probably just annoyed and fed up with these people because he sees them all the time. But when he gets questions that are a little bit different than the day-to-day, he can be actually a little bit more forthcoming. So the few times that I've had to ask him things, I've actually gotten decent stuff out of it. Also, he's at a level where even if he says something that isn't very good, it is still relevant because he said it. Bill Belichick just saying something about Josh Allen is probably interesting enough to most people,
Even
if it's not a very interesting answer.
That's interesting. During practice, what is your accessibility now? Like how much of practice can you see on a Wednesday, on a Thursday? Maybe the short Friday practice, the Saturday walkthrough. Does it change by the day? And is it any better or worse than it's been, in years past?
It definitely changes throughout the points of the season. Like, training camp, you watch the entire practice, which is awesome because that's when you really, I think, can pick up on things. But during the season, once the season starts, you get to watch stretching and individual drills, and which is super intentional. Like, they don't want us to see anything that we're not supposed to see. And that's all very strategic. So you don't really actually take that much out of the portion that you are able to watch, except one, making sure everybody's there. Two, there are a few little intricacies that you can pick up on, but I think those are also like a little bit of protected secrets from individual people that they don't even want to ever put out there, because then it would tip off to their competitors, like other reporters, things that they're looking for. So there actually are a couple things that you can take away, but it is not anything like it would be during mini camp, during training camp, when you can really see. Now, another layer to all of this is a couple of years ago, one of the rules that changed is like, we are no longer allowed to report first team, second team, third team. I don't exactly know what went into that, but there's ways around it. You can say things like, I wouldn't be surprised if Deion Dawkins is the starting left tackle.
Right.
What you can't do is say Deion Dawkins is the first team left tackle, even though it's kind of obvious. The times when it's a little bit tougher are with like guys who are battling for positions or guys who are battling for roster spots. You can kind of walk the line of saying, I wouldn't be shocked if Ryan Bates ends up playing tackle a little bit more this season or something like that. And that's your opinion. You can't get in trouble for saying your opinion. But if you say Ryan Bates is taking snaps at right tackle and Spencer Brown is not, then that's when you would ultimately get in trouble. So you kind of have to walk the line. It's weird.
When did that start?
I think that started in either 20 or 21. But it's only been like that for a couple of years. And it's also evolved. Like when Rex was there, you could do, from a filming standpoint, you could record everything that happened at training camp. And I think everyone before him was the same way. When Marone was there, when Chan was there, everything at training camp was fair game. Now you can only film the same amount, 15, 20 minutes into training camp, which from our standpoint is a really, really you understand it, but it's also frustrated, especially when you're in a setting where everybody's got a cell phone in their hand. Right. So if something crazy happens, why can the people in the stands film it? And why can we on the fields not film it? So that's kind of this weird battle back and forth that we have. And it's tough. There's so many, you guys get it because you worked in it. There are so many layers to all of this that I think just people have no idea about. And nor should they,
I always got a kick out of when it was time for the media to leave practice, and the lingerers, we called them, the lingerers, the guys who would be the last ones out of the room. And it was like herding cats to like leave the field house, to leave the sideline, and a couple of the media relations guys. And sometimes the opposing team reporters, if there were some, they'd stay, and it would almost get to the point where they'd have to literally be shoved out of practice, because they wanted. Wade would hold up practice for a couple minutes sometimes, just until the media finally left.
You saw that a lot more than I did.
Yeah, so there's a lot of give and take, right? What's your relationship, you and the other local guys with like media relations with the team? I think people see it as maybe always adversarial when it definitely isn't.
No.
What is your relationship with the team as opposed to maybe some of the national guys who come in maybe once or twice a year?
Well, I feel like, the national guys come in and the red carpet gets rolled out.
Right.
And I get it. Like, they've got huge audiences. If Peter King is coming to town, he is talking to Josh, even if it's not a day when Josh isn't talking. Like, they want Josh out there on those platforms. So if you're a national guy, I feel like there are a lot of advantages that you get. But the advantages for the local media are that you're there every single day. And I think you can build really meaningful connections and relationships with people. And I think that those can be beneficial long term. My relationship with media relations, I think, is really, really strong. I think I kind of stepped into it at the right time because I became sports director at 2019, which means I was really starting to come to Bills almost all the time, which was only a few years after the new regime kind of came in and they brought in their entire team. So there was a couple people who were there who overlapped from the Rex time, but the person in charge of the entire department was only there, I believe, a year prior to that when Sean took over. So, it's a give and take. There are things that I wish I got more of, but there's also things that I get that I really appreciate. Like the perfect example of this is we had our draft show the other night and the draft was on Channel 7 and I get Brandon Bean live for 10 minutes. Like that's a nice thing to have. So you appreciate that kind of stuff. What I would like more of is, hey, I need Josh for something. Well, Josh is a superstar now. So getting Josh now is a lot different than it was getting Josh in 2019. I could sit down with Josh almost whenever we needed in 2018 and 2019. Now, Josh has so many requests and so many obligations that those are few and far between.
Yeah. Going back to something you said before, Matt, in terms of sports owning the news cycle, Jeff Russo, I remember when I was there, was he sports director?
Yes, he was sports director from, I believe, 2004 when Murph left to 2014. And then and then Joe Biscaglia was the next sports director, and then I took over after Joe.
Okay, because I remember Jeff used to travel with the team and Joe, but then Jeff started to do the regular anchoring. I wonder, what kind of adjustment was that for him to go from to sports to having sports take a back seat, or probably an interesting transition.
That's a work-life balance conversation. And, it's something that I've even had to try and always kind of keep the door open to, just because sports happen when everybody else is off. So that means you're working when everybody else is off. And as you have a growing family, that becomes really difficult. Jeff stepped away when he had a young family because he wanted to be around for his son's basketball games or his daughter's dance lessons or whatever it happens to be. And I always think now, especially having a baby who's now 7 weeks old, I think, how long can I do this until it feels like I'm missing things? And I never want to be in the point where I'm missing things. I absolutely love my job, but I love my family and I love my life more than my job. So you then have to figure out, when does it make sense to step away, or how does the industry evolve? And it has started to evolve. And honestly, a big layer to that was COVID, because so many people started being able to work from home or being able to work shifts where they were hybrids of going into the office or staying home. For years and years and years, if you were a main person at a television station, if you were one of the main anchors or the main meteorologist or the sports director, you worked so you could be on the news at 6 o'clock and you could be on the news at 11 o'clock. Those days have changed. You don't have to always be around until 11 o'clock anymore. So that makes the future for me brighter, because I can say, okay, on weekends, I'm going to be tied up with the Bills game. But if our daughter wants to play soccer and she has a game at 7 o'clock, I'll be able to be there. I just got to do the 6 o'clock news and then I'll meet you there. Yeah. Before, that wasn't really an option. So I'm sure the transition professionally was, it had its bumps along the road, as it did for me when I went from news to sports, because there's just different ways that things operate. But it's just about work-life balance and making sure that you can be present for the stuff that matters.
Yeah, well, if your favorite class at Buff State was 15th century European history, you talk about it on the air, that shows the level of versatility you have. That bodes well for you, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's a good point.
Funny. Before we let you go here, Matt, I'd like to talk to you about the podcast you did with Sal. A, just in general, and then
2-minute warning too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then B, about the upcoming schedule release. After we're going to have an interview this week as well with a guy from UB who heads the grant that the NFL gave them, with the analytics and, kind of the sausage making of the schedule. Can you maybe talk to people about your interview with Mike North and maybe some interesting takeaways you took for this season, and then just in general about, the process of making the schedule and where the Bills kind of fit in, with that?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because, like so many people, I'm a schedule junkie. And I think it's for two reasons. One, I love football and I love seeing all of this kind of come together. And two, the schedule kind of dictates my life from September until January. So I like to kind of have a know of what's going on and where I'm going to be when I'm going to be there. So the conversation with Mike, we wanted to make sure that we did at least half of it on things that would be interesting to people who are not just Bills fans, to football fans everywhere. So we asked him about Aaron Rodgers playing with the Jets and what kind of impact that would have on the schedule, about how many primetime games people can play in, about what goes into the networks and how they have a say in the games or if they don't have a say. And it was really, really interesting. And then from the Bills standpoint, it was just, are the Bills still the upper echelon of the NFL? And he referred to them as the Trinity in the AFC. He said it's Kansas City, Buffalo, and it's Cincinnati. Those three teams are going to be featured in prime time a lot. You are no longer going to be dealing with Sunday 1:00 games. Like, they're going to happen occasionally, but they're not going to happen a ton. And it was interesting to figure out kind of how the networks navigate everything with the Bills and with the entire league, because when you're in that Trinity, the networks want to showcase you. But there's only so many games to go around. So then you need to figure out, okay, what game does NBC get? What game does CBS get? Who gets the Bills-Chiefs game? Because, of course, that's going to want to be somewhere that's, really showcased. And the other interesting layer that I took away from it, and I don't know if this is ultimately going to happen, but it feels like the Bills are a very strong candidate to play on Black Friday, which is new this year. So there's going to be one standalone game on Black Friday this year. And the Bills have played on Thanksgiving 3 of the last 4 years. They do really, really well in that time slot. The numbers are always great. They draw big audiences, even for just being a Buffalo team. So I think because that Black Friday game is going to be on Amazon, it's the first time they're ever doing it. You would want to showcase a really big game. Like, you would want to showcase teams that people want to watch.
My prediction is Bills at Eagles.
Yeah.
That day. That feels like a huge national game. Brilliant by Amazon, by the way, having their national broadcast on Black Friday, because obviously they want to keep people at home and not shopping at a brick and mortar retail location, which I find brilliant. That's interesting. What's your take on whether the Bills will open the season at Kansas City?
I don't think that's going to happen. Another layer to what you just said too about, yes, it's so brilliant from Amazon because the people, clearly they're making money. They're also not going to have that game behind a paywall. So literally anybody can stay and watch it. Like, they're really trying to attract as many people possible to stay home and watch football and not go shopping. I don't think they're going to start the season against Kansas City because I think you can put almost anybody there and people will watch it. And I think you probably want to have that game in your back pocket for week 5, week 6, week 7 or something, when it's certainly not a lull in the season. You want to do it kind of early to make sure that you probably have Josh, you probably have Patrick. Like, that game loses a lot of steam if one of those guys isn't available. But, I think that you could get away with any of the teams that Kansas City is playing at home. And I kind of feel like from the conversation we had, Chicago is going to be a really intriguing option. Big market, people like Justin Fields. It just felt like Chicago and Detroit were two of the teams that it kind of felt walking away from the podcast like, those are real options. There's real potential there.
Yeah. Detroit's kind of a fun one. They're kind of, up and coming, and they're almost like the NFC darling right now. And I think anybody who just has a casual interest in football probably can easily root for the Lions or the Bears. So did you get, like, from Mike North, like, how much is he able to reveal ahead of time? Like, it's kind of be a tough spot for him where he's coming on a podcast, what he's going to talk about, but clearly he might not even have all the answers. How much of the schedule do you feel like was done when he came on your show?
I don't think much. I think they might have had like a loose outline of what they want to do and what they want to accomplish, but I think they were waiting to make sure Rodgers was going to go to the Jets, to see what happened in the draft, to see if there was any like major surprises or major trades that happened over the weekend. Now, people with the league will tell you that the schedule is made, a day before it's released. That's not true. Like, right. I'm very comfortable saying that. Like, they need to send it to all of the teams and make sure that their partners know, their sponsors know. They need to divvy it out. They need to make their graphics and get it on the website and have everything ready to go. So they get a head start on the schedule. And quite frankly, I'll usually have like a 4 or 5 hour head start at minimum. And that's one of those things that we talked about at the beginning. That's like, I'll get the schedule with the understanding that, like, you cannot report this, but you can start to prepare because we know how big of an impact this will have on your life. And also, if you're somebody who's just on social media, you can piece it all together anyway, because
that's such a fun day. That's such a fun game. I did that last a couple years ago when the Bills went to Tennessee. I wanted to surprise my wife for her birthday with plane tickets to Tennessee, and I was able to piece together by about 2 p.m. on that day when the Bills were going to Tennessee. So I was able to jump on Southwest.com and beat the rush. I saved probably like $400 between her and her friend just by getting those tickets at 2 p.m. rather than at 8 p.m. when the tickets had doubled in price. So that's always a fun day.
I last year had flights booked for Kansas City, for Baltimore, and I believe 2 or 3 other games that afternoon. It was a Thursday. It was a Thursday evening. I believe the game had come out. And like you said, Southwest. It's just like, because then you can make sure that you get the money back if for some reason something changes.
Well, you have my DM, so in case the London week comes out early, you know where to find me if because that's another one that I would love to send her to go see. We're gonna go ahead.
I was gonna say you are the 25th person to ask me about the London game. Yeah. We've had neighbors come up to us and say, we would love to take a family trip. If you have any insight, please let us know. And I always, I'm like, I will let you know what I know. But once again, that's like the weird balance of like,
of course,
what do you say? What do you not say?
Of course.
That's a heavy lift administratively for the team, the London game. We'll talk about that. Last time I was in 2016, I was responsible for collecting all of the players and coaches' passports, having them in my safe in the office. I was the first person to the hangar where we had to give them to the players. Then they had to show them to TSA. Then they came back to me. Then on the plane, I had to put them back in an album. And then I was the first person off the plane. I had to give the players their passports back on the plane and then go ahead to customs. And 2 players lost them between the time. I can say who they are now. One was Jonathan Meeks, but we found it.
Okay.
He fell asleep. The other was Jerry Hughes. He just insisted that I didn't give it to him, and I did. And we had to take the seat off the plane, undo it. And finally, 2 hours later, they said we had to go to Parliament to make the case. That,
oh, my God.
Pay £2,500 just for the opportunity to make the case in front of Parliament. And then like an hour and a half later, he opened up, zipped his bag. It fell on the floor, and he was like, there it is.
Yeah. Who paid for the Parliament fee?
We didn't have to go, but our bus left at a hotel. So it was, anyway, a diversion. But that's when it was a nightmare I had before that, and it actually came true.
I believe you.
Anyway.
That's funny. We always talk on this show. Don was the director of football administration for close to 15 years. And we always, and I was in the coaching staff. We always hated the things where all you can do is mess it up, right? Like your job is, do you have any of those situations where you feel like all I can do, I can't really add anything to this. It's kind of expected that I do my job, I report on this, etc. But man, I could really mess this up, and those are the positions that he and I always talk about and joke about that we just hated.
I got a story. It's not the perfect answer to what you're asking, but I think it's a pretty good story for just talking about messing things up. So you guys have probably seen the evolution of what my job is over the years, of it being, these big, massive live trucks and these crews of 5-6 people, to you're expected to kind of do everything yourself. And a lot of the games I travel to solo. So I'm bringing the camera, I'm bringing the gear, I'm doing a little bit of everything. My first year as sports director, it was 2019. The Bills played the Thanksgiving game in Dallas. It's a really big game. It's a really big opportunity for the team to kind of finally show out on the national stage. Okay. What I do, I don't like to keep the camera gear in my car because it's expensive. So I bring it into the house and I put it on the kitchen table and I put my keys next to the camera gear because I don't want to forget anything. And then I know it's not in the car. The morning of the day before Thanksgiving, it was also my birthday, coincidentally. I drove to the airport. I went through security. All the TV stations are there because it's the day before Thanksgiving. So they're doing the stories about the travel and how crazy it is. And I just had this feeling probably about 45 minutes before the flight was about to leave. So 15 minutes before I was about to board, that I was missing something. So I'm looking around and I'm like, what am I missing? I was missing the camera. Kind of the most, the most
story.
The most important thing that I need to have. I was missing the camera. And then I was thinking, why was I missing the camera? Well, I needed to get something out of my car. So I grabbed the keys, went out to the car, but then I never threw the keys back on the kitchen table by the camera. I just put them like in a drawer. So I had everything else except the camera. So now I'm panicking. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to do this. So I went over to the Channel 7 crew that was there for the day before Thanksgiving travel. And I was like, I need your camera. And they're like, no, we need it. Like, we've got to be on TV like 4 more times. And I'm like, I'm literally getting on a plane. I need your camera. They're like, we can't, but we'll give you a memory card. So maybe somebody else can, help you along the way. So I go, okay, that's a potential option. Getting back to the house was not in the cards. Rebooking my flight was not in the cards. But then I had my aha moment. And you guys get this. The team charter was not leaving for several more hours. Like they were coming in the afternoon. So, I'm frantically calling my wife, but it's 4:45 in the morning. She's not waking up. So finally, I leave a voicemail as I'm boarding the plane. I think I was a layover on Delta in Detroit. I call her and I'm like, I need you to bring my camera to Pryor when the Bills are leaving, and I'm going to have a team employee grab the camera and bring it with him to Dallas. So for the remainder of the day, I'm getting updates of pictures with the camera. Everybody on that team plane was holding the camera. You had like the social media people, the photographers, people in the coaching staff, like pointing at the camera, like we've got it. And luckily I was staying at the same hotel. So the morning of Thanksgiving, I got a text message, hey, come get your baby. So I came and I got the camera and I like hugged it. And I was like, thank you so much. You just saved my ass so hard.
That's great. That's perfect story.
It
is. Perfect story. And I'm sure you didn't get any shit from it from anybody involved with the team, right? I'm sure you never heard another thing about it.
Oh my God. It's for the next year. It was, did you bring the camera this time? And it's like, and then you go through that game and like, I could not imagine being at that game and not being able to report on it and to do everything that we need to do. It was such a big moment for the Bills. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, what? Wow. And not now, like that was 4 years ago. You could get away with just having a cell phone. You legitimately could. Cell phones are advanced enough now that I could probably do what I needed to do on a cell phone. But then, even though it was only 4 years ago, like I needed that camera there. So that was scary.
That's a great story. It really is. You got me nervous. I was thinking we had Reed Ferguson on last week, and from a player standpoint, we really didn't say that. We didn't want to minimize what he was saying, but the same thing. But when he talked about how hard that play actually is, the way you get smashed after you do it, but from a media standpoint, that story was perfect.
Yeah, Reed has the ultimate. All you can do is mess it up job on the team. Like no one,
legitimately,
literally. My job on the sideline was to count the number of players on all phases of special teams. So I was terrified that, all I needed one time was to have either 10 or 12. And, I was low man on the totem pole, and Wade would tell me it was my ass if anything ever happened, if there were 10 or 12. So I hated game days. I hated them because all I could do was mess up and lose my job. It was awful. So Matt, before we let you go here, we do something called the 2-minute warning where we try to ask you like 10 rapid fire questions in 2 minutes and get some fun answers. So Don, fire away.
Okay. The most interesting or most annoying fan base in the NFL?
Oof. I'll say New England.
Okay, that's always a popular answer. Where is your favorite place to watch a game as a media member on the road?
Seattle.
Okay. 3 people, dead or alive, that you'd want to dine with.
Okay. My grandmother, who I never got to meet. My grandfather, who died pretty young in my life. And then, I guess my grandmother on that same side, just so they could meet the baby.
Oh. There you go. So you're entering an arena. You're the main attraction. There's dry ice. What's your entrance song?
Ooh, that's a good question. Enter Sandman.
Okay.
Nice. Best concert you've ever seen?
Oof, that's another good one. Garth Brooks. I was second row from the stage. I got a free upgrade. It was supposed to be in like the last row, and I sat in the second row, and that was incredible.
Where's your favorite Buffalo restaurant, and what do you get there?
Left bank, the ravioli, and that's a slam dunk. My favorite meal.
What's a popular food that you hate?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't like real syrup, and people always give me a hard time for that. I just find it to be like a little bit too sweet. So I actually prefer like the fake $2 bottle from the grocery store as opposed to like the real syrup that is painstakingly effort put into, all that stuff that goes into it.
All right. When you were a kid and you were having those waffles with that syrup, what was your favorite cartoon?
Ooh, that's another good one. SpongeBob. I loved SpongeBob when I was a kid.
A couple more. Can you drive a stick shift?
No, which is a just terrible thing for me because my dad has a 67 Mustang with only 25,000 miles on it that does not get driven. And he's like, it's all yours if you want it, but I can't drive a 3-speed. So it sits in his garage.
All right. Your top 3 all-time favorite sports movies.
Ooh, Miracle is 1 for sure. 2 is probably Remember the Titans. And when I was a kid, I watched Angels in the Outfield almost every single day. I don't think it's necessarily like it's not like I would watch it now, but back in the day, Angels in the Outfield and Space Jam were on a constant rotation in my house.
Last one. What road city has the best food?
Oh, that's such a good one. I think a lot of people would say Kansas City, but I'm not going to say Kansas City. Maybe it's just because I'm sick of it because we've been there so many times the last couple of years. Nashville hot chicken is pretty amazing. So I really like when we get to go to Nashville. I also sneakily really love New England just because a lot of the time, I mean, you guys get it. You stay in Providence, but there's that little hill there with all the great Italian restaurants. So you can do that. And then if you actually get a chance to go into Boston, you can go get like oysters and like some really good seafood. So I'll say Boston is pretty high on that list.
Interesting.
Wow.
That
was great stuff. You were all over that.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, Matt, you were our fastest responder ever. I think we were actually under 2 minutes, which is amazing.
Well, you say 2-minute warning. I know that I got to give ourselves a little bit of time to kneel and, spike the ball and do everything we got to do.
It's like you do this for a living or something. Yeah. It's always interesting when we interview media guys compared to players. Players are usually a little slower with their answers.
Yeah, we got good inside stuff here. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Matt.
No, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate your time. Please tell your wife that we all said hello and Jackson was excited that I got to talk to you today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I will make sure that I tell her that, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your summer.
Yeah, you too. And we'd love to have you come back on during the season if at all possible.
For sure. Happy to.
All right, great. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Matt.